I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics. MessianicApologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for October the 24th, 2025. We do have a slightly shorter episode for today. I've got some things I've got to be involved with later this afternoon. So the topic I have selected is from our ministry publication for the Theology Roundup. Our ministry publication, Messianics and the Afterlife. And this is a compiled volume which we released in early 2024, discussing both the intermediate state between death and the resurrection, eternal punishment, as well as other ongoing matters as they concern human composition, afterlife, funerals, the resurrection, etc. So this is a topic I've taken directly from the list of things which some of you all have suggested we talk about. Others of you all have simply said, hey, you thought about this, you thought about that. And then likewise, it involves things I've been prompted to add. All right, so let me switch windows really quickly and we will get into this. And what we're going to be talking about concerns Yeshua's statement as he was dying on the tree of sacrifice. What did he say to the thief next to him? Today you will be with me in paradise. And customarily, this statement of the Messiah's, today you will be with me in paradise, has been used to support the idea that between death and future resurrection, that the human consciousness, certainly those of righteous persons, goes to another dimension. And yet, we do know that there are people who do not agree with that. And they make the claim that, well, if you move the comma, Yeshua's not talking about that very day, both himself and the repentant thief would have been in paradise. And I'll be honest with you, anyone who has studied hermeneutics, proper biblical interpretation, knows you can't just move English punctuation around in a Bible version without having some good cause to it. And unfortunately, in this discussion, as we're going to see, not a lot of people have looked into uses of today, the Greek semeron, in other places, which of course would possibly help or may not help so much what they're trying to communicate. So let's get into this. Luke 23, 42 and 43. And he was saying, Yeshua, remember me when you come in your kingdom. And he said to him, truly I say to you, today you shall be with me in paradise. New American Standard. During the horrific scene when Yeshua was being executed at Golgotha, Calvary, one of the criminals alongside him recognized how this man has done nothing wrong. Luke 23:41, New American Standard. In spite of how he deserved his punishment, he saw that there was something different about Yeshua, and so he asked him, Yeshua, remember me when you come as king. Luke 23:42, Complete Jewish Bible. Psychopanicus, those who support a doctrine of soul sleep, complete unconsciousness between death and resurrection, view this passage as only relating to the parousia, coming, when Yeshua will return to the earth and will inaugurate his kingdom reign and nothing more. Yet, even though the thief was seemingly forgiven and we will all see him in the kingdom, Yeshua was clear to tell the repentant thief, truly I say to you, today you shall be with me in paradise. Luke 23:43, New American Standard. This runs contrary to the thought that the thief will only be remembered in the resurrection. Both Yeshua and the repentant thief would both die that very day, and their consciousnesses would be transferred to paradise, or the Abraham's bosom side of Sheol. You can review the parable of Lazarus and the rich man for that understanding. N.T. Wright summarizes in Surprised by Hope how, quote, paradise is here, as in some other Jewish writing, not a final destination, but the blissful garden, the parkland of rest and tranquility, where the dead are refreshed as they await the dawn of the new day. Jesus, after all, didn't rise again today. That is, on the same day as his crucifixion. Luke must have understood him to be referring to a state of being in paradise, which would be true for him and for the man dying beside him at once that very day. In other words, prior to the resurrection. Unquote. The Dictionary of Judaism in the biblical period describes how paradise is, quote, the home of the first human beings, Genesis 2 and 3, and the place of intermediate rest or eternal bliss for the righteous, 2 Corinthians 12, 2 through 4, with its reference to the praise of the angelic choruses, suggests that paradise is the location of God's throne and places it in the third heaven, unquote. Indeed, it's important to operate within some kind of Second Temple Jewish understanding here. From the usages of paradise seen within first century Judaism, it most often does not depict the final state of things, but rather a restful garden where the righteous deceased would be held until the resurrection and or the current heaven, which will give way to the new heaven. Now, this is where I know a lot of people have been confused. Psychopanicists, however, believe that they have an easy answer to this and that Yeshua was not telling the forgiven thief beside him that immediately after death, the two of them would be in any kind of intermediate paradise. Many psychopanicists feel justified moving the English punctuation of Luke 23:43 to read something along the lines of, truly I say to you today, comma, you shall be with me in paradise. The rendering seen in the Jehovah's Witnesses 1961 New World Translation. For them, this would only be a general statement of how the thief would be resurrected in the future and then ushered into the kingdom. But one's exegesis must be determined from the source text. It is irresponsible and manipulative of any interpreter to simply move around English punctuation in the Bible to fit their theology, without some strong or some sound backing from the Hebrew Tanakh or Greek Apostolic Scriptures, which sits behind an English translation. An interpreter cannot just arbitrarily move commas around in the English. Okay. So, the Greek seimeron means today, this very day, from the BDAG lexicon. As indicated by the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, the vast majority of usages of seimeron in the biblical text deal with events which occurred on the same day as today. In Matthew 27:19, Pilate's wife has had a bad dream today. This is an omen for a decisive day, but the immediate sense is the ordinary one. The usual sense is also present in the petition of Matthew 6:11. Believers ask today for their daily bread from God. Similarly, in 16:3, the reference is to today's weather. In 21:28, the Father asks his Son to work today. Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. The Louw-Nida lexicon defines seimeron as the same day as the day of a discourse, referencing Matthew 21:28 and how a man had two sons, and he came to the first and said, son, go to work today, seimeron, in the vineyard. New American Standard. Greek scholar Richmond Latimer renders Luke 23:43 in his translation as, "Truly I tell you, this day you will be with me in paradise." Yeshua the Messiah plainly told the thief beside him that he would be with him in paradise that very day or moment, not just in the future kingdom of God on earth. John W. Cooper concurs in Body, Soul, and Life Everlasting, quote, "For grammatical, semantic, and history theological reasons, today ought to be read literally," unquote. When the narrative actually says, "Amen soy lego semeron," amen, I say to you today, it is almost impossible to argue that the day this is spoken is not the day the repentant thief would be welcomed into paradise. But even if one decides to arbitrarily move around English punctuation, this still does not quantitatively change the today emphasis of Yeshua and the repentant thief being together in paradise. The only reason why today in Luke 23, 42, and 43 is at all challenged is because psychopanicus know how it lends strong support to a post-mortem, intermediate, disembodied state. If this were any other issue, then what today or Sameron means would probably not be challenged. If the Lord told the thief, "I say to you, today you are saved," or "I say to you, today you are saved," it would all communicate the same thing. Hebrews 3, 12, and 13. Quite notably, in Luke 23, 42, and 43, Yeshua did not just tell the thief beside him, I say to you, you will be with me in paradise." There is a clear emphasis on today being when it would happen. And indeed, the emphasis of that passage is Sameron. And how many people have you possibly heard who just say, well, just move around the English punctuation, and it talks about, I say to you today, you will be with me in paradise. And it's not speaking of the same day as Yeshua delivering that information. When you look at Sameron and you start examining how it is used in the Gospels, that argument very quickly falls apart. Now, it's absolutely true that, let's say, for example, I believe, because that is what I believe, that Yeshua and the repentant thief both went to paradise that very day. Such an intermediate, disembodied state, guess what? It's not the final destination. The final destination is absolutely, certainly for the righteous, a resurrected, permanently embodied, immortal condition, not a permanently disembodied condition in another dimension. But unfortunately, as I have observed for quite a few years, somehow people think that in order to see people return to an emphasis on the future resurrection of the dead, we have to eliminate a temporary disembodied state in another dimension. Well, if you'd like to know more about this, I recommend that you look into our ministry publication, Messianics and the Afterlife, available in both paperback as well as ebook for Amazon Kindle. All right, so we do have some news to go through. We're going to do this a little quickly. Of course, we do the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news is time sensitive day to day and it changes. All of the stories we're about to go through, these should be listed later today for you to look at, read the articles, watch the different clips in their entirety. When this episode of Messianic Insider is archived at messianicapologetics.net. All right, our first story, this is from Open Source Intel, yesterday afternoon, October the 23rd. Trump on Netanyahu's strike targeting Hamas leaders in Qatar. I thought this was rather interesting. And when he made that one tactical mistake, the one on Qatar, and that was terrible. But actually, I told the emir this was one of the things that brought us all together, because it was so out of joint that it kind of got everybody to do what they had to do. All right, so this quote from the president is, no, he didn't like Israel going and bombing Qatar. But in terms of the peace process and bringing everybody together, all those Arab and Islamic leaders together, it was probably, in the grander scheme, the right thing which had to happen for the peace process. That's the president's approach. And look, even in life, whether you, of course, agree with the president or not, but even in life, we know that sometimes a bad drama has to happen in order for good things to come. So that's, I'm sure, Donald Trump's logic. Okay, our next story, and this is from the New York Post yesterday, October the 23rd. President Trump confirmed he plans to visit the war-torn Gaza Strip in an interview published Thursday, while crediting himself as the indispensable factor in brokering the peace deal between Israel and Hamas earlier this month. So, there are, of course, a lot of questions about what the president intends to see in this post-war Gaza Strip. There's no timetable given here regarding when President Trump will return to the Middle East, much less Israel, and then much less the Gaza Strip. I don't think anybody in a high-ranking position has visited the Gaza Strip yet, but we take note of these things, and we know that we are required right now to just pay attention, collect information, and see what's going on. Okay, here is an interesting story from the X channel, Donnie Discern. Some of you all may follow him from time to time. Here he's commenting on a story from regarding Pastor John Hagee at Christians United for Israel conference. This is something which has gotten a number of people upset, where John Hagee, and there's a 1 minute, 21 second clip, basically said, Jewish people in Israel are a chosen people who are above all the people on the face of the earth, and that includes the United States of America. So here, Donnie Discern is making the observation, and again, we're just filing this away as information. He said, Christians read between the lines on what's coming. I'm not a fan of Hagee at all, but he's quoting Deuteronomy 7:6. And of course, Deuteronomy 7:6 is speaking of God's selection of Israel out of all the peoples on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. Now, Donnie Discern draws the conclusion. What's really coming is the world is going to start saying Satan is who chose them in the Old Testament, and that Christ isn't found in the Torah, but within each individual, and that to defeat the Jews and liberate humanity, we must all tap into our Christ consciousness collectively. And so Donnie Discern goes on. That's what this has always been about, not the Jews necessarily, but humanity making themselves the saviors and heroes of the story and accusing Yahweh, God, of being evil. And he says, and God is allowing it to sift and separate sheep from goats. Mark my words, this is the direction things are headed. Okay, so, of course, we don't know exactly how accurate some of Donnie Discern's conclusions are, but he presents a scenario where you're going to see somebody like a John Hagee, who is definitely a Christian Zionist. He supports Israel and is focusing on how God has a unique destiny for Israel and the Jewish people. Guess what? Everybody in the Messianic community believes that. And then they're going to be all these people who come out against Israel, and then they're going to claim that the Old Testament is bad and that the Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh God of the Old Testament is actually Satan. You know, you might hear it called Lucifer or Moloch or whatever, Baal, but basically it's not the God of Jesus. But ultimately, according to Donnie Discerned at least, the fight is not really against the Jewish people in Israel. It's, you know, we've got to reclaim humanity because Christ is inside of us, the Christ consciousness, and in an effort to find this Christ consciousness, people are going to see themselves turning against the one true creator. Okay, that's just one scenario. And I would say regarding the end times, I think there is some truth in that, many people, and I've said this before, many people are looking for the anti-Messiah, the Antichrist, Satan to show up in basically a red tuxedo with pitchforks and horns and a tail, right? Whereas, is that really what we should be on guard against? What about instead the anti-Messiah, the beast, Satan, as the scriptures admonish, coming as an angel of light, wearing the white tuxedo? And, part of the end time scenario, part of the end time spiritual fight being not this, openly satanic, all the kinds of, terrible things you'll see, manifest at a holiday like Halloween, but instead it's this ethereal, look for God inside of you. We are gods and goddesses. We are trying to attain for a higher level of evolution, a higher level of spiritual, consciousness. There are elements of this we need to factor away as possible elements of the end time scenario. Do I have a clear answer for it today? I don't. But these are the kinds of things we do need to just file away as information. And it's not going to end up well for anybody, but it's something which we, of course, have to note and keep in mind. Okay, so let's move on to our next story. Speaking of religious wars out there, religious battles, this is from Charisma, My Charisma, yesterday. You can read this article yourself, but the headline is, experts warn Islam will overtake Christianity in the U.S. Now, of course, many of us have seen what has been taking place in Western Europe, right? Especially in some of the major hubs of the Protestant Reformation. But here, you see Islam projected to become the majority by 2070. Now, that's according to Barna. We don't know. But what we do know is that there is a growing rise in Islam in the West. How does this play into the end time scenario? I think a lot of people are still trying to sort through that. But there are major resources available now, certainly for evangelicals, on understanding Islam, understanding Muslims. I had a conversation a few weeks ago with someone, and I said, I've got in my library a commentary released by African Bible scholars, a single volume commentary which focuses specifically on African related issues. And their perspective is definitely different in some places from those of us in the West. Likewise, I've got another single volume commentary, which is written by South Asian Bible scholars. So it deals with a lot of Hindu related subjects. And then I have just added to my library, I haven't looked at it that much, but it is mainly a Quran for Christians. And it's an English translation of the Quran produced by an Islamic scholar with introductions and commentaries, sort of like a study Bible, but it's written for Christian people to understand Islam. And of course, we don't know what's going to happen between now, the year 2025, and 2070. That's a long way off. But is America, the United States, going to be Islamic majority by 2070? We don't know, and we just need to file that information away. From Visegrad 24, this is along the lines of the Russia-Ukraine situation. This is from yesterday. The British Royal Navy, for the first time under NATO orders, intercepted a Russian warship near its shores. The Royal Navy destroyer HMS Duncan carried out an operation to intercept and escort the Russian anti-submarine ship Vice Admiral Kulikov off the UK coast in the North Sea. Now, this is, of course, not the first time certainly Russian naval vessels have gotten close to United Kingdom waters. I mean, that's been going on since definitely the Cold War. But this is along the lines of drones entering into Poland, incursions of the Russian Air Force into NATO countries, and we got another one of those right after this. The Russian government trying to probe, how far is NATO willing to go? And in this case, HMS Duncan escorted this Russian naval vessel away. But yeah, this is the world we live in, and the rising tensions we definitely see. From open source intel, and this is from yesterday, October the 23rd. There's a 25-second clip. 2 Russian jets violated Lithuanian airspace for 18 seconds. NATO scrambled Spanish Eurofighters. President Nauseda, I probably mispronounced that, called it a cruel violation of international law and the territorial sovereignty of Lithuania. Again, okay, 18 seconds. That's just going to cause an alert. But yeah, the Russian government, are you rattling the saber? Are you trying to test NATO's vulnerabilities, NATO responses? You're trying to see how far you can get with NATO. Yeah, pray for peace, Russia and Ukraine, because we don't need to see this kind of a conflict. Okay, to the final frontier from the New York Post. This is from yesterday. NASA group launches defense probe to protect Earth from Manhattan-sized comet. This is the 3I Atlas. They're battening down the heavenly hatches. A NASA-backed planetary defense group has reportedly begun efforts to pinpoint comet 3I Atlas after it was observed emitting an alloy not seen in nature and exhibiting other strange behaviors. So, of course, there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of speculation about 3I Atlas, not only from more mainstream news sources, but even from a Charisma. Now, we've talked about this before, and there are people out there who are of the opinion that this is something which is not naturally occurring. It's some kind of possibly an extraterrestrial spacecraft. A lot of science fiction people, they see that and they probably are immediately reminded of the planet killer from the old Star Trek. But this is an object approaching closer and closer to Earth. And so you're going to get a lot of reactions. You're going to get a lot of people commenting. And for a lot of people who are into Bible prophecy, it plays into Genesis 6 Nephilim questions, return of Nephilim, or UFOs and extraterrestrials being part of some kind of end-time demonic deception. Of course, we have to just wait and see as this thing is getting closer and closer. Okay, we only have 4 more stories to go through. Okay, here's our next one, and this has been reposted from Open Source Intel Defender. There is a 17-second clip. Former White House chief strategist and member of President Donald J. Trump's inner circle, Steve Bannon, insisting that Trump will receive a 3rd term as president during a recent interview with The Economist. Bannon, well, he's going to get a 3rd term. Trump is going to be president in 28, and people ought to just get accommodated with that. And the interviewer, of course, what about the 22nd Amendment? Bannon, there's many different alternatives. To be honest, and of course, this is not the first time we've talked about people saying that, well, Trump is going to get a 3rd term in the White House. He's going to be president in 2028. I don't see that happening, and I don't believe it should happen. Constitutionally, the president of the United States is barred from serving more than 2 terms. That is something which, of course, came post FDR. Presidents of the United States cannot serve more than 2 terms in the White House. Now, maybe, and I'm just speculating here, someone in the government, somebody in the Supreme Court could make the conclusion, well, what's really intended are 2 consecutive terms as president. And so maybe that is the avenue people like Steve Bannon and others are going to try to argue, that President Trump, well, it's 2 consecutive terms as president. That's what is intended by the Constitution. We don't know. To be honest, by the time President Trump's current term ends, he's going to be what, 83? People are already commenting about his health, and we already do see, certainly with J.D. Vance as well as Marco Rubio, two individuals who are being groomed as potential successors to Trump. Of course, we know this is something which can change day to day, but we do take note of it. All right, here is a story, very interesting, why it's not being discussed more on the Messianic social media circles is beyond me. There's a 24-second clip. This is from Fox News. Open source intel. This is from yesterday. At the White House tonight, a reporter asked White House spokesperson if President Trump is considering building the third temple in Jerusalem. And that is from an Orthodox Jewish reporter at the White House. Now, there are a lot of questions, of course, right now. The big ceasefire, Israel, Gaza, of course, that's in process. But then seeing all those leaders, Sharm el-Sheikh with the president, Arab and Islamic leaders, people speculating on Daniel 9:27. And of course, a lot of people in prophecy saying, well, the only way that treaty could even possibly be related to this end time agreement, because Daniel 9:27 is also tied to, and he will cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. So at the very least, you need to have some kind of an operating tabernacle up on the Temple Mount with animal sacrifices. Of course, along with that, you would want to see mechanisms in place to see the reconstruction of the third temple. Now, what doubtlessly prompted this question by the reporter was what's happening right now in Washington, the demolition of the East Wing and the construction of the new ballroom to the White House. So if the president's going to do this, what about rebuilding the third temple? And that we're not hearing a lot about this in the Messianic community. Of course, maybe some people are just not paying attention, but that says a lot. It says a lot regarding how many people are paying attention to when we are and what's going on. Because while we don't wish to speak presumptuously, that's not what this is about. We do need to know that things are shifting. Okay, back to Russia, Ukraine. This is from, this is from this morning, October the 24th, starting with Putin's special envoy, Kirill Dmitriev, has arrived in the United States for official talks, CNN. And so here, White House envoy Witkoff expected to meet Russian envoy on Saturday, Axios. So this is, of course, very big. We are, of course, concerned that the peace talks in Budapest have seemingly been put on hold. I wouldn't say they've fallen through, but you're at least on Saturday supposed to have high-ranking Russian, American diplomats, envoys speaking to one another. And of course, what just happened is that the U.S. has just sanctioned, we discussed this yesterday, Russia's two largest oil companies. So, right. All right. And our last story, just to keep tabs on what's happening in the Middle East. This is from this morning, and there's a 1-minute, 11-second clip. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, we think it's in Israel's long-term security, and I think our Israeli partners agree, to be able to have a Gaza that is no longer an operating space for a terrorist organization. That's why this plan calls for the demilitarization of Gaza, and that's what we're committed to do. So, of course, the Secretary of State is in the Middle East right now. That follows a visit from Vice President J.D. Vance, which follows a visit from President Trump. And I would expect right now, as the Trump administration is definitely hot to trot, to see this peace plan implemented, that you're going to see just a selection of high-ranking visitors to Israel, to the region. over the coming weeks. That not saying that the vice president or the secretary of state are going to return anytime soon, but the president definitely wants to see this peace plan work, and we need to keep our eyes on what is taking place. Okay, so that concludes our news roundup for today, and we will, of course, see what takes place over the weekend. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. If you haven't, please do visit my website, messianicapologetics.net, where you can access a wide array of free articles, frequently asked questions entries. You can check up on some of the back issues of Outreach Israel News, look into some back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee moment shorts, and our other adventures over the years. And please do leave a thumbs up for this live stream. That definitely helps with our exposure on social media. We'll see you again on Monday with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.